Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. This is Gail of Gaia, and this is Free Range, where we graze on wild ideas. And we're going to be talking about some very interesting topics today with Frank Jacob, who we've had on once before. He is a researcher, a film producer, author. He's done so much, I can't even name it all. And it's very interesting work. And today we're going to talk a little bit about the magnetosphere, which has an interesting effect on our consciousness. And we'll get into that a little bit. And hopefully, Frank can explain it. Welcome, Frank. So happy to have you back again. I'm honored. Thank you.
Hi, Gail. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Fantastic. Well, you had some very interesting information about the magnetosphere. And so I did a little bit of looking into it, which really kind of blew my mind because I wasn't aware of how the magnetosphere is. You had mentioned it one time in your talk about how its effect on consciousness, but
Yes.
I think it's much more profound than we even realize. And it's also related to the ley lines.
Yes, it is.
And
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think that the bad guys, so to speak, have been manipulating the ley lines forever. I mean, it's kind of interesting how you find certain obelisks and even CERN is found on ley lines. Churches are frequently put on ley lines. And so all of this is affecting the entire planet. Is that correct? Why don't you
Well,
tell us found out?
yes. I mean, the ley lines, they're energetic lines, and what the magnetosphere is telling us, or as we've learned about the magnetosphere and the Earth, is that it's basically very much tied to our biology.
Yeah.
And our biology has we resonate. We have certain frequencies, certain organs in our body resonate at certain frequencies, and they're connected to the magnetosphere. And that's one of the reasons why in the beginning of the space age, when astronauts began to go higher and higher off the surface of the planet, they distanced themselves from the Earth's magnetosphere, and they would have strange effects. And this is verifiable science that they began to find out that these astronauts that they were putting up there, or cosmonauts, they were essentially having hallucinatory experiences, or they were hearing voices, or they were seeing things, and which I would prefer to call them visionary experiences,
I do
because
too. I do too. I like that
those are,
much better,
those are
much
the
better.
words scientists like to use, words like hallucination, and shamans like to use words like vision. Right. So the Earth's magnetosphere is something which stabilizes us and is very unique to our bodies, and has a lot to do with space travel, in the sense that if we were to go off planet and spend any time on any other planet, even in our own solar system, it has a different magnetosphere. It has different frequencies, and it would disturb us. Our bodies would have to adjust to it. We probably have to have some kind of a artificial magnetic pulse generator with us that emulated that of the Earth. And in fact, that's what a lot of the scientists have been developing for the astronauts. Yeah, there's different technologies. A lot of them were developed in Russia, to my knowledge, things like the Kozyrov mirrors, where people went inside and they simulated the experience of the astronauts being free they isolated them from the magnetosphere, and they began doing a lot of studies. And so, this was very important for any of the space programs internationally, but it's having more of a significance, you could say, to us normal folk right now, because we're also affected, of course, naturally, because we're all living within the same magnetosphere. But what's happening to the Earth is the magnetosphere is weakening dramatically in the last years. And
Why?
it's
Do you know?
because it's tied to the sun. The
Okay.
solar cycles play a role with it as well, because we are essentially, in our solar system, part of, like, the sun is it's like our compass, in a sense, for these kinds of energies. If without the sun, we obviously wouldn't exist. The sun gives us heat, it gives us light, and it protects us through its heliosphere. It has this aura around it, which is called the heliosphere, which is a magnetic field that extends like around us and shields us from things out there that are like space is extremely toxic. From everything that they've learned about it, it's highly toxic. It's very radioactive, and nothing could really live in space traveling for loads and loads of time because of the toxicity of it. So the sun's heliosphere surrounds us like a mantle and protects us from these cosmic radiations, these microwaves, these X-rays, these gamma rays, these particles, these frequencies. And that's been kind of what's made us exactly the way we as humans are. Now, whenever that heliosphere changes, and it changes when the sun's cycle, when the sun also contracts, like it contracts its heliosphere as well. And when that happens, and we have these low sun cycles, like we're in something now which is called the grand solar minimum.
Yeah.
It means that the sun has never been really, in I think recorded history, as weak in a sense as far as the heliosphere goes and its protective mantle to the Earth as it is right now. And what that's doing is it's affecting our Earth's magnetosphere directly. It's a direct coexisting biosphere, just like our bodies. If you were to just pull an organ out and think, "Well, I don't need that one," well, the body can't it'll compensate to a degree, but it can never fully compensate for everything. So the magnetosphere is being affected by our sun. And because our sun's heliosphere is actually contracted to such an extent that it has, in fact, if you want to see something, I probably can even show it to you.
Yes, please.
You know, this is a kind of a graph that shows you the last 3 solar cycles. And if you see here at the top on the far left, and this is 1990, and then the next one was, you know, between 2000 and 2005. And then the one here, the cycle 24, is at 2015. And we're right in between these cycles now. We're here at 2020, obviously, and you see how low things have gotten. And what happens is then when that heliosphere shrinks, we are exposed to more of the cosmic radiation that I was telling you about earlier than we normally are. And that has an effect on us as well. And that's what's really interesting about what we're going through right now, and seems to be a part of the equation that has to do with consciousness, I would say. Yeah, because scientists will always try to explain things in terms of atheism, that's all just rocks and molecules that bang together through, you know, through the odds of infinity. One of the sequences worked out and made consciousness.
Right? Yeah, right. It's very funny.
Yes, exactly. Right. So, and this is one of the things that's been kind of become very, very clear to me over the last few weeks and months, as I've been digging more into, starting with the looking glass thing and also just expanding it out into this information about the cosmos and why we're going through a consciousness change right now. What could be triggering that? Because we explored that in the Tale of Two Timelines webinar I did, how actually the J-rods were telling us about that consciousness can play a direct effect on how the cosmos affects us as well. So it's not just a one-way street. And how would that work? Well, so I've been digging into the science behind it, because I don't just want to go on channeled information and, Ashtar Command said, and all this other stuff. That stuff tends to always be extremely watered down and filtered. And I'm trying to stay clear, in fact, of all of that stuff right now, because when we did our film Packing for Mars, we explored more of those avenues of like, let's just give everyone the benefit of the doubt and tell their story. But now we're in a place, or at least I'm in a place where I'm like, okay, I've been there, done that. It's time to kind of be critical and look at channeling and this kind of information as an interesting supplemental source. And we're not excluding it ever in any of our work. We always bring that in because it's interesting to see if there really is any correlation. But more than often, you see that it's the other way around. It's like the channeling follows the real information. After it kind of gets out there, all of a sudden, all the channels begin pulling out all this information relative to something which has been talked about already. And because, anyway, that's another story. Is that from the
unified field or what? Yeah, that's a whole nother story. Yeah. Okay.
Right. It's another story. I'm not out to bash channelers anyway, because, I think everyone can be a channel, and they just have to open themselves up. All the channel is to me is just somebody who's opening up to their higher senses. And the only beef I have for the most part with it is that, why give it a name? Like, why say you're channeling a certain entity? Why not just come clean and just say, look, I'm just tuning into my higher self and own it, right? And because then, you have to take responsibility for it, right?
Yeah.
You're owning it, right? You can't just say, oh, I guess, Ashtar was wrong this time. And the galactic forces came in and they put a shield around such and such, and it saved it from going down. And
So
all
you
these
always
things
got
we've heard
someone to
over the
blame.
right. You've always got a blame or an excuse or a reason why it
Yeah.
then didn't go the way you expected it to. So what's happening is that, with this information about consciousness raising and us actually affecting, how does that work? Is there something really behind it? And because I happen to know some people over in Europe that are biophysicists and astrophysicists and that are geeky, and they cross over into this material, which a lot of scientists won't go into, which is more the spiritual aspect of it.
They can't
They
handle
explored, one in particular explored for the last 30 years, frequencies, particular frequencies, which have to do with 150 megahertz, for example, is one such frequency. And the other aspect that they played with or experimented with is weak magnetic fields, very, very close to our certain parts of our temple. And there's been scientists like one of the ones we interviewed in our film Solar Revolution is by the name of Professor Michael Persinger. And he was working up in Sudbury University, and he invented something called the God helmet. And the God helmet is, you can research it, just Google it. It's pretty fascinating stuff. He took a motorcycle helmet, or maybe it was a hockey helmet. I think, it was a helmet. It was like one of those helmets, right? Like either a bicycle or a motorcycle, and because
Whatever.
it had you could easily access through the helmet certain and mount these little weak magnetic fields in the helmet and then hook it up to EEGs and things like that. He began to explore what happens when people are experiencing alterations of the magnetic alterations close to their temple and certain other parts of their brain, certain brain, like certain pieces of the brain, like, the pituitary and, the limbic system and things like that, and see what effect weak magnetic fields would have on them. And what he found, to elaborate on that a little bit, that's very fascinating with the God helmet, is he found that people would began to have like visionary experiences. They would actually hear, they would have dialogues, they would actually see things and explore other time, space dimensions while in that state of being stimulated with, and of course they were inside of a Faraday cage in complete darkness. And they would, and they would see light and things, and they would report on that. And Persinger was one of the few people who really studied and documented a lot of that work. And so that ties into my friends in Germany, Dieter Brers being one of them, because he, made us go and interview Persinger because it was tied to our film, because our film was called Solar Revolution. And it had to do with this evolution that was caused by something coming out of the cosmos, in particular the sun. That's what that film's all about. I highly recommend it for people who haven't seen it because it's very current. Even though we did it 10 years ago, there's never been a comparative film exploring the science behind that ever. But it's continued since then. And so what's happening now with this weak magnetosphere is that we are getting levels of exposure to these cosmic particles and rays and frequencies like never before. And those are particularly interesting because they're affecting our pituitary gland, for one. And that 150 megahertz, whoa. interesting
You're
little
shining your light.
confirmation. Yeah.
Yeah, really. Wow.
You see, I was just being blasted by those cosmic rays. It just triggered my studio, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So what's happening is that these are, and I'm telling people all the time that, like, be cognizant of it, because this is happening. These things are actually penetrating through to us like they never have. And what this causes is it causes our particular organs that we have in our body, like our pituitary gland, our pineal gland. Our pineal gland is one that is a big one because it's regulating a lot of the chemicals that have to do with our sleep cycles and our waking cycles. Serotonin, melatonin, and one in particular is called dimethyltryptamine.
DMT.
Right. And a lot of people, will go and do ayahuasca trips to have these visionary experiences, or they'll smoke DMT. Or we did, in our film, we had Rick Strassman did a volunteer study with over 40 volunteers that had directly injected DMT into their bloodstream, 100% pure DMT, and then had these experiences, and they were all filmed and documented. We show some of those in our film. And it's interesting because they go away for maximum 10 minutes. because it breaks down so quickly in the system. DMT just disintegrates virtually in minutes. But in those few minutes where it's in your system, it goes past the blood-brain barrier because the molecules are so small that it just creates these hallucinatory, visionary, whatever you want to call them, experiences. And people have these trips that seem to last 1,000 years or so even. They feel like they've traveled across the galaxy into other universes, and they've met with people, and they've talked to them, and they've gotten information and brought it back. And the interesting thing is that these people, they brought back experiences which overlap. They weren't necessarily like if somebody were to take just LSD, for example, and the next person beside them were to take it, each would have their own kind of crazy experience depending on, you know, what their mental state of evolution was, what kind of conscious person they are, how spiritual they are. It'll have a different experience. But the experience with dimethyltryptamine seems to be very similar, meaning that it seems to actually open a doorway to particular existing dimensions, which we can tap into. And so what's going on in the universe right now is it's bringing us close to that, you know, that, I guess you could say, that evolutionary leap. It's giving us the stimulus, and it's helping us. It's almost like the cosmos has worked out everything from the size of the planet to the magnetosphere being weak, to the solar cycle, to the place we are in the cosmos. That's another thing. Like if you look at this this diagram right here, this shows us kind of a spectrograph of the galactic plane. And the red part here is the center, and from the center basically are coming these resonant frequencies, and it's actually so far away that you wouldn't think that it would reach us, you know, forever, right? But what's interesting is right now it seems to have been, what's happening is that it's transmuting physical dimension and going beyond physical and faster to the speed of light. They're actually measuring it. You know, we have Dr. Robert Sarkis Karapetians in the Max Planck Institute here, who's connected with Dieter, and they're actually measuring these cosmic rays, and they're coming at us like on a scalar frequency, which means they're superseding the speed of light by far, which means that it's almost an instantaneous transfer of information coming to us from the center of the galaxy. So yeah, that's kind of what's going on right now.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And then, well, I don't want to frighten anyone, but the pole shift thing comes into play here. And one of the things that, you know, with the picture that we picked and so on is how important it is for people to remain fearless. And we thought you were a good example of that because of the different things that you've put out yourself on, you know, the deep research and so on. And it is information that can help everyone because, you know, knowledge is power, and advanced knowledge, it leads to freedom. So, and that's where we want to go. At least I want to.
Well, like, you know, wouldn't it be better, Gail, if you knew this stuff was going on, and if there really was a pole shift, if you were prepared mentally for it? I mean, it's much, I think it's much going to make you much more prepared and calm and you know, powerful when something, if and when something like that does happen. It just means that you're ready for it, and you can surf it, you can go with it, because it's obviously part of the cosmic plan, you know, which comes down to, again, that same argument. Are we just, you know, a coincidence of a bunch of random rocks and molecules that bang together?
Yeah. And could you tell me why the monkeys or the chimpanzees aren't turning into humans anymore? How did that work?
That's funny. They got left behind. I know. Yeah. They just decided to, you know, that's where the evolutionary motor attacked, I guess. I mean, just, you know,
some of the things that we have believed, I see them now and I go, oh my God, I can't believe I actually, you know, where was my critical thinking at the time? You know, it's like you just,
well, you can't help it though. You're a victim of the environment you grow in until you become conscious. So you grow up as a kid, you go to school, you learn these from, you know, your teacher teaches you what you think is real science. Yeah. You don't realize that it's completely obsolete. Whatever you're learning is so far obsolete already that, you know, they say that most graduates from university, when they graduate, the information they learned is between 5 and 50 years out of date already. So what happens is that the world is living in the past. Right now, we're living in the past tense. You know, all the sciences and all the mechanics and all the physics and all that, it's all just ancient knowledge, right? But we formed our society around making that work. So, you know, you graduate from university, you got to get a job, right? And so, you know, everyone everyone else seems to slow down relative to each other so that you have a job to link into, even though the information is obsolete. So you just go into a workplace that's working in the past. They're all working on obsolete ideas. And we are living in this past all the time, actually, theoretically and physically, because of that very simple fact. But what's happening...
Go ahead. No, go ahead. It's not important. Go ahead. I was just thinking in terms of my own education and how much of it has changed and how much, I like Mark Twain's quote. I never let my schooling interfere with my education, or something like that.
Exactly. So, we all have to continue not everybody has to, but, I think those who are wanting to become awakened and raise their consciousness, they are faced with the task of continuing their education. It doesn't stop. The thing is, the things are evolving. And so if you're interested and if you're that kind of personality, then you can find all kind of stuff to stimulate your not just your brain and your intellect, but you can actually learn to tap into higher sources of information. When you're a musician, for example, you're listening. Like I spent a long time in my life, working on music, and I would hear things, I would hear melodies and beats and lyrics, and, I don't know where I was getting that from, but that would be called the field. Now I've learned where that is. Back then I didn't know. I just tapped into it, and it was called my creativity. Yeah, but all of us have this tap into these other dimensional layers that go all the way up to the 12th dimension, according to Burkhard Heim, at least. And these it's like all this knowledge is put into a repository, and all this information is, and we are constantly, through our DNA, through the resonance of our DNA, tapping into these portals leading us to other dimensions where we pull this information in. So we're the end product in the way of we're raining into physicality from higher dimensions. We're like in the third dimension, with fourth being time, to create movements that we can have cause and effect. Yeah, but we're still operating within this box of the three dimensions voluntarily, because obviously there's something very fascinating about this place that draws a lot of people here. And, there's, I guess the difference is there are those people who worship the box, and that's the atheists, the scientists who don't believe that there's anything outside of the box. And then there's ever since quantum physics, that began to delve into the inner, microcosm, and that's beginning to prove that it's there's actually nothing there. It's got more to do with spirit. And so, we're now at that point where, and then of course the church saying that there only is spirit, that God created everything. And then the scientists, with Copernicus, I went into that a little bit in some of the recent shows, how there was kind of a battle between the geocentric model of the universe and the heliocentric model of the universe. And the geocentric, I found that very interesting. I stumbled on an interesting film recently that was exploring that. And it made me look at that again, because I always thought geocentrism was connected with the flat earth, the whole, realm and all this stuff, right? But actually it isn't. It doesn't mean that at all. That's just a misinterpretation. Geocentrism means that there are moving parts around us but the only difference is that instead of, the earth moving around bodies and traveling through space at X thousands of miles per second, everything's
funny how we don't spin off the earth.
everything's moving around us.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that, as ridiculous as that sounds, even Einstein said there's no way, there's no optical experiment that you can perform to prove that the earth is even moving. Yeah, a lot of people probably never realized that Einstein ever said that, right?
Right, they hide stuff like that.
Copernicus was one of the first ones that, and then Galileo, when he saw the moons of Saturn and things, they said, well, it can't be that the earth is, moving, and everything's moving around the earth is moving around the sun's moving around this, and that's moving around that. And that's how the heliocentric system got developed. But funny thing is, once they ditched the geocentric model, they adopted this idea that we're moving through space. They had a lot of problems. And their theory and their math, their experimentation led to factors of error, which are astronomically speaking. I mean, if you do an experiment in science and you're off by a factor of 1 or 2, you go back and you rethink your problem, and you try to do the experiment again and adjust for the parameters. But in astronomy, in cosmology, in this heliospheric system, the heliocentric system, you have a factor of 10 to the 120.
Hmm.
So they're so far off, and they have to keep inventing things to stuff the holes in their theory so that it continues to work, or they'd have to start all over again. And so, we're at that place right now, for me at least anyway. You come full circle, having, completely gone the direction of science for a while to see where that takes us, having, learned that in school, and then schools have become more or less neutral, they say, but even though they're more artistic than spiritual or creator oriented.
They're not spiritual at all.
I'm back now where I'm looking at it again. I'm going, okay, well, let me look at this geocentric thing again. What does it really mean? And so you find out that there's actually new science, recent science, recent measurements that have been taken that seem to indicate that indeed the geocentric model is not to be written off, and that you can you can work out the math for both the heliocentric system as well as the geocentric system. In both cases, the math works out. The only difference is if you were to start adopting the geocentric model, you would have to toss out the majority of physics and start all over again. And that's not going to happen.
Well, I have heard, though, that a lot of the physics is going to change, or they have new information, that some of the information was incorrect. I'm not a physics person, but my colleague, the dot connector, is, because she's a physical therapist, so they have a lot of physics. But anyway, this is all very fascinating, and it seems like every department, every area, that we've been lied to in every single one. Sometimes I'm glad I don't have it all memorized. Because you just have to relearn it all, and sometimes it's hard to get past things that you've got so ingrained that it makes it harder. And back on the ley lines things, I think it's really interesting that different native groups would call them spirit lines, and some cultures called them dragon lines, and some cultures called them mystical lines, and we call them ley lines.
Right.
But nonetheless, they are very impactful, and they've been hijacked, I think, by
yes,
the planetary controllers. And
yes,
it's one of their ways of manipulating not only us, but also catastrophes on the planet.
Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, the way they manipulate them is to know that they exist, and then they plant themselves on them. If you've noticed, a lot of the ley lines have the church has their buildings on them. Churches are built on, huge cathedrals are built them all through Europe. A lot of the church has placed its cathedrals and owned land directly on top of these ley lines. And these ley lines are nothing else than, when you can do an experiment where you can put a magnet under a sheet of paper and then put some small metal particles on top, and you'll see those particles will arrange themselves in a very specific pattern. And there's another way to experiment that as well. You can use sound for that as well. You can actually bombard those particles like sand, for example. You can put it on a sheet, and then you can hit the sheet with very powerful musical frequencies, and they will arrange themselves according to the notes into different patterns. And so the ley lines are just basically the same thing. I mean, you can look at this, for example. This is another element of the geocentric model. What you're looking at right here is, if you were to look at that little dot in the middle up here on the left, that's Earth. And when they did this thing, they put something out in the sky called the Sloan Digital Sky Survey Satellite. And that satellite mapped out the universe and all the galaxies. It took them years and years, but they basically brought back the information, and they put it together in terms of, okay, let's translate it to a visual medium. And what they found is that these circles that you see emanating from the Earth outward are they're spaces of 250 million light years apart. And what's interesting is they were shocked to find that all of the galaxies in the universe seem to arrange themselves along these lines. And here's another way, like a 3D model. If you were to take this two-dimensional model and create it in 3D, you would see here on the right, the center as being the Earth, and then emanating outward from the Earth, crazy enough, in spaces of 250 million years are these, well, you could say, cosmic ley lines. And why would it be any different, Gail, right? It seems like these kinds of laws exist on the microcosm as well as on the macrocosm level. So all of it again is pointing to the fact that there are these energetics out there there's this, that's comprised of electromagnetic fields, magnetic fields, gravity, and they basically form in patterns that are found all through nature. And that's why it's no surprise that you will find monuments and ancient monuments on specific locations that many years later, with scientific modern instruments, they were determined, my God, they actually built this right here on this spot. How did they know that? Right? That's, one of the biggest
the
questions.
Key right there. How did
right?
they know that? They had to be
How do you know
sky
that,
gods.
Right. And so, that's one of the things that we explored with like Klaus Donau, because, we did a film with him as well. It's another film called Klaus Donau Chronicles, which you might want to check out. That has to do with out of place artifacts. And those out of place artifacts go back millions of years in some cases, or cannot even be carbon dated. They're so old that seem to indicate that like there's no way they could exist if our contemporary view of history and archaeology is true. Which means that there probably have been many civilizations on our planet without us even knowing it. So many, in fact, that have come and gone over the space of millions of years that had this technology. And that's why they built these things, because they could read those things. And on top of it, let's not discount the fact that shamanic experiences, there are certain sensitives in cultures that can tune into vibration and frequency. And we have people that they use rooting. They have these rods and they walk and they can find where there's water.
Yeah.
Have you heard of those guys?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Dowsers.
They're called dowsers, right? And they basically go around, they find water because they can sense energies. And so this is, dowsing is nothing other than a person who's able to tune into ley or water lines. Water lines have energy, and ley lines have energy, and these things are all things that people tapped into, and they're things that relate very close to us. And we've had, some of these things are qualities that we have that we've long forgotten. We have abilities, we have creative abilities, and locked in our DNA that are so far advanced that we just we don't even believe them. They seem like magic. And there are some individuals on our planet which can tap into those. Those are the people that we call the psychics, or the wonder kids, or the people that can, bend spoons, or read minds, or levitate, or walk through walls, or manifest like, rings out of thin air, like Sai Baba, or things like that. There are those people that have been placed on our planet to remind us of the fact that we're more than just, hunks of rocks and atoms that landed together by coincidence.
Yeah, it's really an amazing thing, how all these energies work, and we're all connected, and that's a big thing that we have to get to as a collective, is unity consciousness. And people seem to have trouble with that. I mean, what do we need? We need to be more compassionate. We need to be more kind. We need to be nicer and smile a lot. Make somebody smile. I always tell everybody today, it's your assignment, if you choose to accept it, is to make somebody smile today. Do something that improves the energy of the planet. And it doesn't matter if it's just one person, because you affect another person, they affect another person. It's exponential how it works. And
yes.
So there's another area that I find rather interesting that I don't think we have exactly right, and I'd like to hear your perspective on it, and that is gravity. Is it gravity, or is it centrifugal force that keeps us where we are, or what? Not that it matters that much, but I don't know that we have all the answers in that area. What do you know about it?
Well, I just know that, as far as gravity goes, I'm not a physicist or anything. I know that gravity plays a role to a degree, because it has to do with energy, and there's certain, for us to be able to experience the three-dimensional realm, we had to invent something, or there had to have been something that acts like gravity. And I think the question for me has always been, is it like, what is gravity? Is it something that just acts like gravity, or is gravity a real thing?
Yeah,
because I don't think anyone really understands. To my knowledge, nobody's really been able to figure out exactly what gravity is. There's the electric universe theory. There's the idea that we're in an ether. And they tried to disprove that, of course. Einstein was working on trying to disprove that there's ether. something called the Michelson-Morley experiment that they did. And they found out, that basically, that they said there is no ether. But then there are those people that are ether scientists that are saying, no, it's not true at all. There is ether. And ether actually compresses things and, moving toward it and things like that. So, but it's very complicated. I mean, I'd hate to be guessing what it is. I just think that a lot of it has to do with magnetics. And because magnetics attract things, and gravity is a form of magnetism in a way, because, if a planet turns, then it creates a magnetic field, just like we are able to emulate in science. When we spin magnets, we create a field, and we actually create electricity. And so there's a reason why I think the Earth spins, and why the Earth has a core which generates a magnetic field, and that affects our consciousness. I think those things are needed, because that's the model that was, I guess, if some people think it's a simulation, there's all these rules in the simulation that make it work the way it does. And ultimately, does anyone really have the complete answer? I don't think so. I think we're still learning that. And I think we've so clung to this, this heliocentric view of the universe, that everything's that there's no creator, that it's all just coincidence, that we've gotten away from exploring some of the things that may have blossomed if we'd have been more oriented around the idea that there's a creation out there, and that we're co-creators, and that we can create things too, because we've been given qualities which can manipulate frequencies, because creation is nothing other than you manipulating the frequencies around you. You can manifest things by changing the frequency.
Well, what's interesting is they have been doing studies. I think it's called the Blue Brain Project or something like that. And we have these layers in our brain that are actually connect us to multidimensional things too. And there's so little we know about our own selves, and so much of what we were capable of doing has been shut off, suppressed, or memory wiped, whatever they've done. I mean, and the strands of DNA and all that kind of stuff. But this idea that you or measurement that you brought up, that we're being hit with 150 megahertz of which relates to our DNA, right?
It relates to our DNA, exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it will be activating it to maybe to go back together, to bring the strands together. I don't know how it's going to work.
Yes.
But it just seems
that's the thing. That's what's interesting, is that these frequencies are generally in the experimentation that has been done with those specific frequencies, it has actually induced people to have visionary experiences, or even healed themselves of illnesses, because they saw, not that they cured it with the frequency, but because they all of a sudden through the frequency had a recognition of something. It triggered a memory that led to them understanding the cause of what their illness was. And as soon as they checked it, the illness went away. This has happened with these frequencies. Wow. Yeah.
That's
so
amazing.
Not in everybody, right? But it has happened, which is enough evidence that there's something to the fact that these frequencies are here. And it's just a coincidence, or it's a cosmic orchestration, whichever way you want to look at it, that right now we happen to be in a place in the galaxy where I can show you that too. That's an interesting diagram.
Yeah.
You can see this here. Like what we have is this here is where our sun is. You can see, I don't know if you can see my pointer, maybe. And you see that essentially there are these arms in the galaxy. This is a top view of our Milky Way galaxy. And so you've got these spaces in between these arms where there's less matter. And if you were to turn this flat on its side, you would see there's like a plane, a galactic plane. And the Earth and the solar system oscillate above and below this plane in cycles of 12,000 years or 13,000 years. And every time we reach the center point, the plane of the galaxy itself, we somehow reach a place like right now where we're kind of in a place where we're in direct line with unimpeded, like if all these dark like whiter areas are denser, so the dark areas are less dense, meaning that the particles coming from the center are traveling along these dark areas, and they're coming right into contact with us unimpeded, right at a time now when our magnetosphere is as weak as it's ever been, and when the heliosphere is contracted. which seems to be some kind of a cosmic orchestration for us to get this input, because these cosmic rays and these frequencies are going to stimulate us to have particular experiences. Particular chemicals will be released, like our pineal gland, like I was saying, will release DMT, will create DMT, and then we will have these experiences. So people might be getting, having strange experiences. They might be getting visions. They might having memory recall. That's another thing that I haven't mentioned, is that we're actually, getting hit by positrons as well, which are the antimatter of electrons. And so when they recombine, when we're coming into contact with those again, they recombine. In a way, they fulfill, like in consciousness, they bring the memory back together. And so it completes something. And so a lot of people are experiencing, recall of past events, or their karma is being absolved. It's being canceled out. They even did an experiment at CERN about that. They did an experiment where they brought these. Here, I'll show you that too. They brought
That's
these.
Fascinating.
They essentially collided matter and antimatter, so positrons and electrons, and what they found was that they canceled out. So essentially we're canceling our karma. So right now, it seems like even the physics seems to indicate that if there's a word for karma in physics, it would be embodied by this antimatter matter colliding together to cancel itself out. So we're neutralizing our karma, almost like we're being prepared for that evolutionary quantum leap that we're expecting humanity is going to have. And that, we've been told about through the prophecies of the Hunab Ku from the Maya and from the Hopi and other indigenous people, seem to all be pointing toward this cosmic ray, which comes at a particular time. And it seems to be right now. So we're getting it right now. So it's like, we're in the sweet spot, Gail, right?
Yeah.
We're there. So take advantage of it, is all I can say to people is, if you're having strange experiences, don't think there's anything wrong with you. Just realize, oh, okay, that's my body responding and resonating with the information from the cosmos. So
go with the flow.
Go with the flow, go with it.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I have been having a few memories of things that I'm going, whatever brought that up? Kind of thing. And it was a fairly clear picture too, like kind of like a vision of something that had happened in the past. And I'm going, wow, I wonder why I thought of this.
I've been having them too.
It's pulling our, like you said, pulling our memories together. And it's amazing how much we have been suppressed in so many different ways, poisoned in so many different ways, in even ways that we're not even cognizant of at this stage of the game, because we're just finding out about. Because what about inner Earth? That's a whole nother ball game. How is that affecting us? What are they doing to contribute? Because I see it kind of like one of the things that I liked about the movie Avatar was all of a sudden everybody was in on it. The animals, the plants, you name it, everybody was helping. Just like you just mentioned about the cosmos. I mean, everything is being orchestrated. You can't tell me this is just random and coincidental. I'm sorry, I don't buy that.
Well, I think that's what it comes down to, Gail. Like, what are your, like, you have to decide. Do you want to believe that we're created and that we're creator beings, as like we're the creator's creation, and we've been endowed with creative abilities? Or do you want to believe that we're just random rocks and molecules? And that model, if you accept that model, there is no higher creator being. It looks dismal, because in that model, eventually the universe will expand to its maximum, because the particles and all the stuff, the energy from the center and the gravitational point from the center of the Big Bang center will eventually reach its limit, and then it'll contract again. It'll all crash in on itself, and it'll all be over. So there's no meaning to it. And in a way, you could say scientists have the atheist branch of scientism, some people call it even, is a way of reducing us to being insignificant. So if we believe we're insignificant, then why would we believe that we're able to do miracles? Why would we ever believe that there's something special about us? Because science is telling us, no, there's nothing special about you, dude. You're just some rock. By total fluke of coincidence, And we don't know how, but like actually it can't be, because the universe is so perfect. It couldn't be created, but the only way we can explain it is we can say that the universe is created infinitely every single split second of time. It's recreated, and it's this big bubble bath of potential universes, and the bubbles blow up and they change and everything, and it happens through all of eternity ad infinitum. And eventually, if you have infinity, that's what they call them, the multiverse, that one of those universes in some point of eternity and infinity is going to arrange the rocks and molecules in such a way so that we are created. That's the only way they can explain it. I mean, doesn't that sound absolutely ridiculous?
It's
I mean,
absolutely
when you think about
ridiculous.
it now, it's like,
it makes
come
no
on,
sense
man.
at
Like,
all.
you want to believe in like hocus pocus? Like, really?
And
but you don't want to believe in a creator, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes no sense at all. And this is one of the things that I think I like, that I've heard from David Icke for years about, we are infinite consciousness. The idea that we're this small little nothing, nobody, is what's keeping us.
Yes.
There.
Yes, that's exactly it, Gail. That's exactly it. And there is an agenda to keep us there, because there's been a whole body of science and a whole school of thought, and leading all the way through education, universities, and into the applied sciences, that wants to maintain that model at all cost. And like John was saying in our last interview, like Greg Braden found out about this with the DNA, and they went back and it proved that Darwinism is obsolete. But do you think they're going to let Darwinism go just like that? No, they just say, no, man, we've got this whole body of work out there. We're not just going to throw that out. We've worked at it for hundreds of years now. And damn it, we've got Darwinism.
We cannot admit we were wrong.
Yeah, who cares? The hell if we're wrong. We're just going to work with it. And we're going to make it work somehow.
We'll make
and that's
it
the
work,
problem with science, is they make it work. And that's where things like dark matter comes from, right? They couldn't explain why galaxies are spinning up to 100 times faster than they should be, because if they were really spinning that fast and their idea of physics is correct, then the universe, the galaxies will be splitting apart. But they're not. They're staying together. And so they had to come up with something to keep them together. So they figured out, let's just call it black goo. It's a dark matter. So dark matter, it's this thick, invisible stuff that makes up the majority of the universe. We don't know where it comes from or what it's really all about, but it must be there, because otherwise the galaxy would blow apart. So that's how they work.
I know, that
they
blew me away
stuff.
the first time it blew me away the first time I heard you say that. I'm going, oh my God.
No, I mean, you can look at it. It just keeps going deeper and deeper, just like with Darwinism, right? A lot of evolution is only exists. I mean, a lot of biosystems only exist in a symbiosis, meaning that if there's a particular whale that needs a certain fish to pick its eyebrows or its eyelids, so that its eyes don't rot and become full of fungus. What came first, the fish that picks the eyelids or the whale? And I mean, you can't have one without the other. I mean, just like there are too many. That's just a really crude example now, but I mean, there's many symbiotic systems in the environment that they're just so complex that you need one and the other. It could not have come from one single cell that crawled out of the ocean at some point in that eternity, and then decided to turn into a second cell and became, the whole world. I mean, this is like, to me, that sounds more and more like, like a crazy hocus pocus belief system than anything else.
Well, I would like to know how they explained another thing that Greg Braden managed to find out that I thought was really important. And that is that they took the DNA and they used the letters of all the different elements and so on. And somehow they put it into, they attached it to the DNA, which ended up coming out saying God eternal within the body, in every strand of DNA in our body. So,
yes, I remember that. Yeah. And that rings a bell. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's just a random thing that just happened, and it just happens to be in everybody. So anybody that's human anyway, I don't know.
Exactly. So imagine if we were to start, devoting at least some fields in the university, some classes in the university that allowed us to explore some of these ideas again, and to be taken seriously and not just be laughed at.
Yeah.
Then I think we would have some major breakthroughs. Like with anything, if we were to be able to take magnetism back into in terms of energy creation. There were magnetic motors that were developed in the 1950s that proved that you could run like perpetually and generate more energy from them than you needed. So if we were to develop those, for the last few decades, we'd now have free energy devices that are pollution free. We'd have replaced our oil industry by now, and oil would just become what it's probably better for, just a good lubricant instead of a fuel source that pollutes, and creates so much poison on the planet. So that,
and they have the audacity to blame the people when in fact they switched to oil when they were coming out with hemp, which doesn't have a carbon footprint, but oil
right.
sure the heck does.
Yes.
And
well, I mean, it does, but even if it does, it's just minor. Like that's the thing for me. The more I'm not a proponent of man-made climate change at all. It's just not possible. I mean, alone this, like if you look at this, for example, here, this blue circle is the total amount of atmospheric gases on the planet, and this little red sliver, if you can even see it at the very top, represents the amount of CO2 in that total amount of atmospheric gas. And on the right side, if you were to take that red sliver and then convert it into the part that man generates, the amount of CO2 out of this red sliver that man generates is represented by that little yellow sliver, which is, basically, it's 0.012% of the carbon in the world is generated by mankind. So, no matter how you look at it, it's just absolutely ridiculous to think that mankind could have any impact whatsoever on the environment based on his carbon emissions. Just not possible. It's just ridiculous. It's absolutely stupid and absurd. And it's another version of how we've been dumbed down and gaslighted by a so-called consensus science. Yeah, the consensus is in man-made, blah, blah, blah. But they don't talk about the poisons, the poisons the plastics and all this stuff, which is unnecessary. The amount of poison they need to generate to make fuel. And they just, and the poison for generating lithium out of the ground so that they can make electric cars, and the poison to haul the cobalt out of the ground. I mean, all these ratios of product to waste is just ridiculous. If we were to just have switched to magnetic motors back in the 1940s and 50s, we wouldn't have any of this at all, And so you're right. It's an absolute, they gaslight us, and then what they do is they just keep us, not only mentally enslaved, but they keep us financially enslaved. Yes. Now we're paying trillions and trillions of dollars in carbon, taxes. And over here right now, there's a major, crisis going on with energy. I mean, my energy bill, I don't know how it is for you over there, Gail, but my last month bill was 123 euros. Guess what it is this year when my contract renewed? It's now 480. Oh, just like that. And that's more than I think almost 4 times as much as I was paying last year every month. And they never gave me a warning and said, "Hey, Frank, we got some problems getting some electricity to you. It's going to be expensive. It's going to go up a little bit, like 400%. Are you okay? Are you okay with that? Are you going to be able to cover that in your tight little budget over there? So they don't. They just do it. They just abuse us and use us and manipulate us and gaslight us. And this is all just care. This has got to crash. This has got to go away. And maybe what's happening with the universe right now with all these frequencies is actually going to give us that kick in the butt, so that enough of a proportion of us that suddenly clicks into place and wakes up and sees through the garbage. And not only that's only one part of it. It's also getting the the guts to stand up to the system in enough amount of us. So that's not just a few isolated people like, David Icke, a lone, light out there in the darkness about how, back in the 80s. I mean,
well, look what they did to him too. I mean,
imagine if there was 1,000 David Ickes out here right now in the world, right? I mean, it would start to turn because it would be inevitable. Like all this information, when we were talking about the looking glass material, and we were talking about how the like last time we talked about this in this coming digital cryptocurrency world, that's coming at us, this artificial intelligence world.
They're ripping people off there too.
Right. I mean, that's how they're exactly. I mean, that's another example of how the transhumanists are saying box and molecules and we're gods. There's nothing beyond us. So let's just go the distance and become computers. Before they even realized our full capacity and our full potential as human beings that's locked in our DNA, that's been, gaslighted out of existence for the last few hundred years. That was a long
Amazing,
rant.
isn't it?
Okay, maybe you should say something.
No, I agree with you completely. I'm really on the same page as you are. I just love hearing you say it, because you fill in a lot of details.
Why aren't there people? Why are there not any politicians in any parliament or any senate or government or Congress anywhere in the world where, with the exception of some cool people in Australia, where are the voices that are coming out with arguments like mine? Like, hey guys, you're giving us this idea about man-made global warming. Did you know that Friedrich Lulling in 1954 created a blueprint and a working engine that ran on magnetism? Why aren't we pulling those blueprints back out and coming up with pull 10 of our most brilliant scientists out of McGill University or wherever, or Stanford, and we'll put them on that problem. And I guarantee you in the next year, we'll have a totally clean energy source. Why are there no politicians saying that? Where are they?
Exactly.
Right? Everyone
because
says,
they
well,
don't care
they're bought
about
and paid
us.
for.
They never have.
They never
cared
have,
about
right?
us.
And so,
No.
they're liars and they're just actors. They're just playing a
Pathological liars.
role. They're reading a script, and they're sold on themselves, and we're making it easy for them because no one's going up in their faces
in the meantime.
and saying,
Yeah.
you guys, like, I want some
Enough
answers
is enough.
now, right?
Yeah.
That's what we need to do. And that's what the awakening process is about, because we got to stop pretending there's angels are going to land and ships are going to come and Jesus is going to return. And they're not going to fix our problems, man. We got free will. That's why we were given free will. It's up to us to rise to the occasion. And the occasion is now. How much longer are we going to wait? How much longer are we going to wait for the white hats to finally pull the switch and, all the sealed indictments are going to come out and all this other crap we've heard over the years. Jasara, Nasara, the global economics.
I want to see something real. I'm tired of all the bullshit, quite frankly. I'm sorry to say that, but that's just the way. It is what it is. Why can't we be told the truth?
People don't think it through. They don't think these things through logically. They just cannot work. The cabal that has spent the last 100 years developing its ironclad banking prison system is not just going to say, you know what, let's just go to Jazara now and we won't make any more money on it. We'll bring in the QFS and we won't make any more money on the transactions. And in fact, we will lose all of our possessions and people will just, commerce with each other directly and they won't need us anymore. Sounds like a brilliant idea. Let's do that.
Yeah.
They're not going to do it. They're not.
It's not going to happen. Yeah,
it's not going to happen.
We're going to have to take it from them. That's what it boils down to. And I don't know.
Right.
All this time we've been told to, the plan. Trust the plan. Trust the plan. We don't even know what the plan is, for one thing.
Right.
It does appear like that there could be things going on behind the scenes, but I'm tired of all that. Something needs to be right out front right now.
Right. Well, there's nothing wrong with trusting. The problem is with these operations is that they covert and they what's the word? They take possession of our terminology and they turn it around on us. And there's nothing wrong with trusting, because trusting for me means if I have a plan, say my plan is to make a film, or a webinar, whatever, I have to visualize that. I have to do some research. I have to learn. I have to educate myself. I have to empower myself with knowledge and feeling and everything. And then I have to envision that package. And then the plan is to put it together and release it. That's the plan. And if I don't
do that
trust,
very well, by the way.
And if well, thank you. And that's why I'm speaking from experience. Trusting the plan means that I trust myself and I trust the universe to deliver the elements. But I have to do the stuff. I've got to do the research. I've got to actually do the hands-on nuts and bolts stuff.
Yeah.
I can't sit back and expect that the webinar or the film is just going to manifest in 5 years or 2 years, whenever. I have to do it. It's hard work. It's painful. It's irritating. It's costly. It's not easy. And spiritual awakening and spiritual enlightenment is a difficult process. There's a great book by Jack Kornfield called After the Enlightenment Was the Laundry. Or something like that. You should check that book. That whole book is about how people went and got enlightened, in the Himalayas, and they came back home to their wives and children, and they almost had nervous breakdowns because they couldn't get back into their enlightened state. The idea of spirituality and spiritual awakening means integrating the spiritual knowledge into your, like bringing it down to the 3D. That's why we're here. and then it'll flip. It'll open us up again to all those potentials and abilities that we have locked inside of us. But that's what the plan is. But if someone just tells you, trust the plan, the white hats have been working with, with Trump or John F.
And
Kennedy
they don't tell
Jr.
you
for the
anything
last
else.
16, 20 years in the background, and the military is just standing there waiting for them to, I mean, even the idea that they made Clinton sign the Nassar Act by putting a gun to his head.
Gunpoint.
Anybody
Yeah.
that knows anything about contract law means any contract with a gun to your head under coercion of life is a null and void contract. That's not what they do, right? That's not how you do it. That's not a higher spiritual cause.
Well, obviously it didn't work either.
And it didn't work, obviously, because they hit the World Trade Center and took their entire center of operations out, if you want to believe that. It's amazing how there's always some amazing kind of thing that happens that just happens to eliminate all the evidence and all the information that could prove it's real or not. It just, and then it resorts back to being trusting the plan, Right. And so it's absconded with the idea of faith, and it's abused it, and it's worked against us, because these ideas of faith and trusting are powerful manifestation qualities that we have in terms of our own plan, but not in the plan that's coming from somewhere outside of us.
Right. Yeah. Especially coming from outside of us, because the types of plans that are coming from outside of us are from the controllers putting thoughts in, different beliefs and so on out there that people will fall for, and it will adversely affect their consciousness. And that happens a lot. But anyway, so how do we fight this? I mean, what can we do? I mean,
well, I don't think fighting it is going to help. Okay. That's just, going to cause resistance. Mm-hmm, I think what we need to do is like jujitsu. We use the force of the enemy against them. So in jujitsu, you use or in karate or in judo, you can take the weight of your enemy and use it to propel them and to get control of them. And the way we do that is like we've been saying for a while now, is like to look, first of all, to look at the darkness, to understand what you're up against. Because once you understand what's really going on in the world, and you're not just trusting the plan, but you're actually saying, wait a minute, you're waking up and smelling the coffee going, oh my God, the transhumanists are just this close to manifesting a world dominated by artificial intelligence where I'm going to be an insignificant nothing. And then once you realize that, and you begin to, and the more of us that realize it, the more of us can say, no, that's not the way we want to go. And so we're not going with the flow any longer. We're stopping their timeline from manifesting. We're taking energy away from their timeline. And the other thing you can do is to begin visualizing the world that you really want to have, the world, the new world, the higher frequency world. You need to see it. You need to see what that might be like. Are you telepathic? Are your friends within, shouting distance? Is there free energy? Are you living in permaculture gardens around you? Is the neighborhood full of fruit trees? I mean, everyone's got their own vision, but if you spend some time meditating and having joyous, happy thoughts about what that world looks like, and you do it in your own way. Some people meditate, other people go jogging. I like to go for walks and put on some music, and then I see it. I can see it, and it's anything that I've ever materialized in this 3D world. I have visualized it and seen it, and then there's emotion behind it, and we have this amazing thing. We have emotion. We're not just robots. Even artificial intelligence robots will have to emulate emotion through some algorithm, but it'll only ever be something which is outside of the true spirit of our emotions, which come from outside of this dimension, which artificial intelligence will never be able to understand. They will always be confined to the 3D world, and we will never be, if we, unless we don't realize it. And we do actually pump those wires into our head like Neuralink and, like Klaus Schwab and Elon Musk, all these people want us to do. And then we will say goodbye to the organic human biological form, and it'll be the end of us for sure. This generation is the last generation of natural biological human beings. So that's how serious it is, Gail. That's how important it is for us to make the connection between the world we've been led astray with, see it as what it is, not to get bogged down by it, but just to identify the crap you've bought into. And realize that you're not going to buy into it anymore. You're not going to play along anymore. You're not going to consume their materials any longer and their ideology any longer. And once you start doing that, you break away and you begin to resonate together, all of you, or all of us out there that are visualizing and resonating in the higher frequency and the higher consciousness. I think that's the only way we can do it, by ignoring and by visualizing something new. And that's how only thing peaceful will ever come this way. And maybe we will have help. We're having help from the cosmos, obviously, like I was describing. Maybe there's even
Certainly
going to be
seems
a
that
pole
way to
shift.
me.
We don't
Yeah.
know. Maybe a
Yeah.
pole shift will come and knock it all out, and it'll, I don't know. These things are all possible. Like we talked, you saw that.
Yeah.
We're 7 months away from a magnetic pole shift, and anyone's guess what'll happen. Is this going to be the end of our surface dweller world for a while? So are we going to throw back to the Stone Age? And I mean, how many of us know how to even build, how to make a glass? I mean, I don't know how to make a glass. If it all were to go away tomorrow, what would I start with? I'd have my hands, some wood, and I would make a fire, and I'd throw some sticks at a animal or something and hope I can eat. I mean, this is what happens, right? If we don't know, if we don't keep possession of the knowledge that we have, we're going to go back into older times, and this could happen. But the upside would be that it would it would also destroy the plans of the idea of the transhumanists, at least on the surface. Let's not pretend that they wouldn't go under earth to their deep underground military cities and bases to save themselves and not us. But I think that, like I was saying, we've learned that our consciousness and raising our consciousness can actually feed back to the universe, and so we can dynamically affect whether a cataclysm will affect us or not. This is a fact. I mean, even if you look at the solar activity, it's been blowing people's minds that every time the sun turns away from us, these massive sunspots happen, and there's these huge eruptions that are hitting, I don't know, they're hitting Venus, for example, and other planets, or they're just going out into empty space. But if they were to have happened, like in cases a couple of days earlier, we would have been wiped off. I mean, and this happens so often that it makes you wonder, like, why is it that every time the sun turns itself around to us again, it settles down, it goes, okay, just chill out on the solar flares and stuff. It's almost like some force is saying, hey, so divinity, right? Divine
exactly. And that's what's coming, and that's what, in my humble opinion, the Christ return is Christ consciousness. It's consciousness. It's not a physical being. It's consciousness. And it's the kind of consciousness that we need to develop right here and right now, and bring our planet and the earth to where it needs to be and where we want it to be, where humanity is living in abundance and prosperity.
Amen.
Now, if we can just encourage people, myself included, and everyone else, to do your meditations, to do your visions of how you want the future to be, because you have no idea how important that really is. Everything I read, everything I research indicates it's absolutely critical.
We are extremely powerful beings. We are like giants who have been convinced that we're dwarves.
Yes.
We have the amazing abilities to do all these things. We're powerful creator beings. We just need to step up and start doing it, start being it.
And stop being afraid. Get out of fear. I mean, I'd like to emphasize too, one other thing is that we never die. It's just a transition that should give you some encouragement to be able to say and do what you think is right, in spite of any consequences. That's a lot easier.
Very important. I'm glad you mentioned that. Fear, and the fear of death in particular, is what's keeping a lot of people back. So yes, be fearless, knowing that you are an eternal being. Or whatever that means. Know that you're a higher being, that you're a higher energy, that you come from source, and that you are not, that the end of your physical body doesn't necessarily mean the end of your consciousness.
Exactly.
And so be fearless. So that this will give more of us, the guts to get up there and go out there and there's just got to be many more of us out there talking, many more of us getting into the faces of those who we've elected and given our power to make decisions. And if we don't like those decisions, we need to find a courteous way of having one-on-ones with these people we've so-called elected, and sit them down, maybe with a laptop and a PowerPoint presentation, and give them some facts and ask them some hard questions, and do it repeatedly. Don't just do it once. Ask them for a progress report. That's what you pay them for with your taxes. You say, I'll be back next month for a progress report. I want to know how you guys are doing. What have you done? Have you talked to any other senators? Did you guys have any meetings? Is there any bills you've got proposed or anything on free energy or magnetic motors? How about that? And if you don't let up, they have to follow what you want. They have to follow our will, but we have to express our will. And we have to express it intelligently. We have to educate ourselves and not just be talking about, highfalutin, crazy channeled ideas. I mean, that's going to turn everyone off. Try to get some real information and try to get some information that really does matter. And I think the transhumanist agenda and the crypto digital currency world that's coming at us is a really good starting place, because it really is the end of the biological human being in one generation. If nothing is done to change to take the train off the tracks as it's leaving the train station, it's happening. I mean, if you want to believe it or not, these people have a lot of power and a lot of money, and they're doing it. And barring a pole shift, very little is going to stop them unless we get up and say, no, we don't want this.
You're absolutely right, and I'm all in favor of that. Learn how to say no. No, I'm not going to wear that thing. No, I'm not going to get this thing. No, I'm not going to stay in the house. No, no, no. I'm a free being, and that's what free range is all about, being free. So anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I know we're right at the cutoff point, so I can't thank you enough, Frank. I would love to have you on again. It's fun to talk to you. I love the research that you've done, and we're definitely on the same page. So I really do appreciate that. And let's do it again. That's all I can say. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. And I hope you enjoyed the show. I'm sure you did. And
thanks for having me. Anytime, just definitely. Give me a call.
I will. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
We'll stand. We'll stand. We will stand. Standing tall.